Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hope everybody is doing fantastic. Listen, today we're just going to go right back into our previous conversations of trying to understand who God is, if there is a God, right? There has to be some characteristics that we ascribe to him. And over these next couple of videos, I just want to break down each characteristic that we're going to go through, starting with him being all-knowing. Okay, now I know this might be hard to wrap our minds around because we don't know everything. So there's no way if we know everything, then God knows everything. But this is where we can kind of trip ourselves up because we're trying to see who God is through how we interpret things or how we view things or how we want to see things. But in actuality, since God, again, in order to understand who God is, right, we're elevating him to be the highest being. So for him to be the highest being, there are very different things about God that we don't have access to or capable of having or even capable of fully understanding. Okay, so the first thing I really want to share with is he's all-knowing. So what does this mean? Well, there's a word for this term of all-knowing. It's omniscience. Now, I don't want you to get tripped up by that, but it just simply means all-knowing. So God knows everything there is to know about everything. So I really want to break this down into 4 phases so we can kind of grasp this as we journey along. Okay, number 1, God's omniscience or God's all-knowingness is intuitive. So what we simply mean is it's instinctive. Like his knowledge is just instinctive. So the good question that could come with this is, well, where did the Lord go to school? Right? Because all of us have went to school at some point, so God had to go to school. No. God didn't have to go to school. Why didn't God have to go to school? Because God doesn't have to study, analyze, or remember what we need to study, analyze, and remember. And I'm not specifically talking about your degree to my degree or your diploma to my diploma, but I'm simply speaking of in complete generalities. Everything that we've learned and come to know, we had to be taught, we had to learn. God didn't have to learn anything. Because God, in order for God to be God, again, the highest being outside of creation, had to know these things immediately and simultaneously. So what this means is that it's instinctive. His knowledge is instinctive. God doesn't forget. And because God doesn't forget, God doesn't have to remember. So all of it, all of his knowledge is literally all over his mind in terms of what there is to know and what there isn't, or what there is to know, which is everything, okay? Because there's nothing that God doesn't know anything about, okay? So it's intuitive, it's instinctive, it comes immediately, and it's instinctive, okay? So 1, his knowledge and all-knowingness is intuitive, okay? 2, his knowledge is personal, okay? So his all-knowingness is simply saying that he knows you and I and every human being, past, present, and future, all at the same time. He knows every last one of us. He knows you, he knows me, he knows your parents, who you're sitting next to, he knows who you're sitting around to. He knows your geography location, okay? And he also knows you personally, right? Your feelings, your personality, your thoughts, what you've kept a secret from others. Yeah, it goes that deep. Yeah, the things that other people don't even know about you, the things that you may not have even known about yourself, God knows. In fact, scripture tells us this in Matthew 10, verse 30. Matthew 10, verse 28 through 30, we get a nice passage of God describing that because he knows every sparrow or every bird that flies in the sky and every lily or every green or flower or green grass that grows from the earth, he knows you and me because we are of more importance than a bird or a grass growing, flowers blooming, right? We're of more importance. This scripture also tells us that he knows every hair on our head. That's really personal. Let's look at Jeremiah 29:11, where we read, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." So God not only knows you and the hairs you have on your head, but he also knows the plans he created for you and the future he has for you while we are all living in the present, and also knows about your past all at one time. But then we also see that not only he's knowing of you in that manner of the plans, but he also read in Jeremiah 1 verse 5 that he knows you before he created you in the womb. So he knew you before you were formed in the womb. That's very personal. Okay, so God's knowledge, not only about creation is intuitive, or about everything is intuitive and instinctive, immediate, but his knowledge is also personal. So he knows you and I very personally, down to the core, to the deepest of deep, to deepest of deep. That is how much God knows. There's nothing that God doesn't know about us, secretively, openly, thoughtfully, what we said, what we did, all of that, feelings, attractions, all of that. Okay, so his knowledge is intuitive, his knowledge is personal, but then we read that his knowledge is purposeful. Okay, so there's nothing that God does that doesn't carry out a purpose. Okay, everything that God does, that God allows, that God brings to pass, that God keeps from, is all with a purpose. So you'll never find God doing something just cause, or doing something, I just kind of thought about it, it occurred to me. No, that's not God, right? Again, for God to be God, these are the attributes that God has to receive, because this elevates God past us, right? Past our understanding into many degrees, and him being the highest being there is ever, right? So there's no one greater than God, as we've discussed. So not only is his all-knowingness purposeful, personal, and intuitive, but finally it's also comprehensive. Okay, it is comprehensive. So God invites us to get to know him, even though his all-knowingness surrounds everything. Okay, so when we read of it's comprehensive, I want to read this passage to you, or not passage, but just bring this thought to you. When we look at it being comprehensive, there is no detail that's overlooked. So God knows every detail about everything that's happened everywhere to everyone in all of time. Wrap that around your mind. For God to be God, he knows everything about everyone, everywhere, in all of time. Okay, I might have messed that up from when I previously said it, but it's just a small reiteration that God knows everything. So there's no detail that God has left out or that God hasn't seen about you, about what's around you, about creation, any of those things. Okay, so I know this might have been a lot, but let's look at these things, because we're going to continue looking at this and kind of connect these things together towards the end of this little 3-4 videos, remaining videos coming after this, that are really going to tie things together to some major questions that you might want answered. So let's recap, right? So when we look at the all-knowingness or omniscience of God, it is intuitive, meaning it's immediate. Okay, and simultaneous, meaning God didn't have to learn anything. He didn't have to go to school to learn anything. God already knows, because he knows everything. There's nothing he had to be taught. There's nothing he had to study. God knows. Okay. 2, it's personal. He's knowing of you and me, our names, our gender, our birth, our hairs on our heads, the feelings and attractions that we feel, the things that the people closest to us don't even know. Right? Our future, our past, and present. He knows all of that, all at one time. He's very personal in his knowingness towards us. It's also comprehensive, meaning that there's no detail that God has left out God has left out. So there's no detail that God has overlooked or doesn't know anything about. And then finally, it's purposeful. Okay, so there's nothing that God will do that doesn't carry out a purpose. Whatever it is, wherever it is, however it is, God does not allow anything to happen without a purpose. Everything happens with a purpose. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm hoping that you're able to grasp some of these things, and I can't wait to see you in our next conversation that you don't want to miss, because we're going to keep connecting these things that are going to help us understand some of these attributes and characteristics of who we are labeling as God. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see you again. But until then, peace.